This is the Simpit. I'm your host, Sean Cole, and today we're going to do one of my all-time favorite do-it-yourself projects, and that is where we take a stock set of Logitech G25 or G27 pedals like this and turn them into something that looks more like this. And there are a few reasons that we're going to want to do something like that. I mean, this is a fine set of pedals. They work great out of the box. You don't have to worry about it. But there are reasons that we might want to consider altering them, and there are a lot of ways to go about that. So for starters, if you're on a desktop situation, it's often difficult to get the pedals to stay in position. The carpet grippers on these aren't always adequate, and I've had to build things up to the wall, things like that, to get these to sit down. If we build ourselves a pedal set out of wood, for example, we can actually extend the base to contact the wall and create that bumper so that they're not constantly moving. The other thing for desktop people is sometimes the pedals all the way on the ground are a little bit too low for the optimal position, and you feel like you're kind of a bus driver stepping down on the pedals. You might want to be able to put them a little bit at an angle or even lift them up just a touch, and you're going to be able to do that, especially if you're using like a wood type base. And for those with dedicated rigs, it allows for better spacing, a different heel plate angle, and even invert the pedals if that's your desire. I always found the plastic case to look a little cheap, feel a little flexy, and even make some noises during heavy braking. Now in my case, I've gone with a metal construction, and I'm using it for a fixed rig. So whether you're on a fixed rig or a desktop, another option is going with metal. I've used the extrusion tubing, or 80/20 is another name it goes by, profile tubing, and a lot of people call it. Anyway, any type of metal or any type of iron metal that you can get at Home Depot, angle iron, anything that you could cut to length, you actually can bolt the stock G27 pedal structures to it independently. Or if you do it with wood, you're just going to need to drill them out and be able to do that. So it all starts with needing to take these apart and break it down so that we have our gas, brake, and clutch pedal in our hands, and we can mount them to whatever type. And I'm going to go ahead and show you both a wood version and a metal version, maybe show you a few different options, and you could even use this as an opportunity to invert your pedals if you prefer inverted pedals. So let's go ahead and get things cleaned up here, and then we'll start with breaking this down and then move on from there. So now we are ready to break down the pedal set, and I'm gonna go ahead and get these pedal faces off is the first step. Not a lot of science in that. And now this next step I actually have to thank Frank Rico of Tech for. He taught me how to take this pedal set apart, and I've done it many a time. But the trick is to get a box that will actually allow you to flip it upside down and have the pedals just in there and have it supported. And now you can remove every screw, which there are 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12 black screws, which we'll remove. You will also want to remove the 14 silver screws, 12 of which are visible, and then the 2 that are tucked away under the carpet grippers. You can now remove the plastic bottom cover, and you'll see all 3 pedals floating freely in position. There are 2 screws to remove that hold down the wiring, and then carefully remove the pedals and the wiring, and that will free up your pedals so that you can do what you want with them. So now that we have our 3 pedals isolated, a few things we can do. You can see I did mark them all, clutch, gas, and brake, just to remember. There are 3 wires. I could disconnect them. I would recommend taking a picture or marking the locations, and a little ground wire as well. So if you do want to take them apart just to not accidentally pull the wires apart while working, you can do that. But the magical thing here is on the underside, it actually is an M6 hardware, which we use all the time. This is the same screw thread that we mount our wheels with, funny enough. It's the same holes, actually, that these do bolt to your rig. So if you use the stock holes, it's these right here. Well, we can utilize those. I can use a piece of just a little 90-degree bracket and screw this bracket into the bottom. And this gives me one great mounting option, so something like this. And then if I want to use a profile tubing or an angle iron, if I used angle iron, I could have just done this, and you'll see where I'm getting at there with a few of the designs that I'm going to work out. But a few different options just to let you know the direction I'm thinking is, whether it's profile or 80/20 tubing, we could do something like this. bolted to that, we can then independently adjust our difference between our gas, brake, and clutch pedal to however we desire. Or we could do it onto wood. Simply mark our locations on a piece of wood, and then mark our locations, drill holes, get a little bit longer at M6 hardware, and be able to mount it to wood. Then the next step would be just taking this piece of wood or taking our track, and how are we going to mount it, whether it's inverted or regular. So let's look at a couple of different design options that I have in mind. A wooden base is fairly simple and can probably be done with wood scraps that you can find. In the case of the one I am building, it consists of 4 pieces of wood, some wood screws, and some paint. In the case of my rig, I took preliminary measurements and have an idea of how much space I am working with and a vague idea of the angle and location I want the pedals to be in. With that in mind, I'm going to make a couple of pieces larger than I think I need them and then trim them down after fitting. My top piece that holds the pedals is 16 inches wide, which is the width of my pedal box area. And then I made it 16 inches tall, which is enough for a heel plate and some up and down freedom in the design. I took 2 pieces of wood, screwed them together so that when I cut them side by side, they would be identical. They measured 11 inches long, 4.5 inches high. The base is also 16 inches wide like the top, but I went ahead and made this one 24 inches long, which I'll get to later. I loosely placed the 4 pieces together with the top and bottom and the angled pieces sandwiched in the middle. I use a drill bit to pre-drill a hole to prevent my wood from splitting, and then even use a countersink so my screws will sit down flat. I then use 4 wood screws to attach the sides to the bottom of the top piece. I measure the distance from the front that I want the pedal faces to be at, and then flip the whole thing to attach the top portion to the bottom in that marked location. I use the same technique of pre-drilling, countersinking, and adding my 4 screws. We now have a nice solid angled pedal base that will allow for placing our pedals anywhere we want. I then mark off the locations of the screw holes for the pedals, allowing for extra spacing between my gas and brake. After drilling the 6 needed holes, I mounted each pedal with the M6 hardware, and I'm ready for a trial fit. Now, the reason I made the base 24 inches long while knowing that my pedals are only 8.5 inches from the front is that it would demonstrate how this base can be used as a backstopper for desktop use. The added length reaches the wall behind my desk and prevents the pedal base from moving at all, period. For me, that extra length was too much for my rig and had to be chopped off, but now I can test fit the pedals on my rig. After sliding them into place, I add 4 more screws mounting this solidly to my base. After a few test presses of the pedals, I realize they're a little low and that I'm going to have to raise them an inch higher. This will allow for more heel plate for my feet to sit on. So it's back to the work area to drill 6 new holes, add some paint, and remount the pedals. I also used a little Gorilla Tape to hold down the wires and guide the main wire in the area towards my computer. And that concludes my scrap wood version of the pedal box. Moving on to a metal version that can be built in many ways, but the overall shape will mimic what we did with the wood version. I used 2 metal bars that will go left to right. Using 80/20 tubing, I have angled pieces that I can then bolt the pedals to. This structure of 2 bars and the 3 pedals actually makes for a very rigid assembly that can be bolted to anything. I use another set of similar bars to raise the rear end of the pedals, and this will allow for them to be bolted to my rig. The front bar will sit directly on the rig and will be the lowest portion of the mount. Another option is to add a set of bars joining the front part of the legs to the rear if you're looking to place them directly on the ground. Now, I have both the wood and the metal variation of the pedal mod here, and they both achieved the same goal. It gave me a much more aggressive angle than the stock pedal set, which I could have just mounted them elevated, but again, I never liked the plastic shell. The other thing, I have that accomplished over here on the metal version as well. But most importantly for me, I'm predominantly a left foot breaker, which means I have achieved the spacing that I really want. It gives me a little bit more room to operate both pedals simultaneously, the brake and the gas pedal, and I've done that in both cases. Now, things you could do if you wanted, you can see I used a piece of diamond plate here. It's actually a piece from a Thrustmaster. I could have just built up wood. If I wanted to have an adjustable or a different angle for my heel plate, I could just stack up wood to the right height, put some drills through it, and go ahead and take care of that, and that would work out just fine. The other thing, looking at my version over here, I just took a piece of diamond plate. This could have been any piece of board, metal, anything, and I could have just found something to support it, and again, could have just bolted it down and use it any way that I see fit as an adjustable heel plate. So that's 2 modifications you could do to your own version. The other thing I want to point out, a little correction or something I would do differently. Now this set I was building really on the fly as I went along. As I mentioned, I made the top too long, but I was happy because I needed more heel plate here. I was able to move things up. One thing I did do wrong though, is you can see I only covered this angle to here. So my future version, I would have made this angle 20 inches. So I would have measured out 20 inches here to this height because I love my angle, and that would have been my 2 triangle pieces. The other thing is I went with a 16-inch wide base, which is way wider than most people are going to need, but that's what fits my rig. What it did was it made a very large hollow section though. I probably would have liked to have done a 3rd strut just to prevent any flexing. I mean, there's really none going on, so it's not a big deal, but a 3rd brace in the middle would have added a little extra support. All in all, I'm not telling you, oh, the other thing I want to mention is I also done an extra length on this, as I mentioned, for the desktop version, which is probably the biggest user of this version of the pedal base. I cut that off so it also fit my rig. But what I really wanted to demonstrate here is the endless amount of options that this pedal set has. You have these great mounting points. It makes it so easy to put it on a wood base. I could have made this adjustable. There are a million different variations that I could have done to this version. Same thing here. I've got the adjustability to put my pedals. It was really easy to mount using a little piece of angle iron. I could have just drilled through plates of steel, or if I was using angle iron, a lot of times those have pre-done holes. I could have mounted it right through there. Endless options when using the G27 pedals on their own like this. So I hope you've enjoyed this. I hope you've learned something. Maybe it gave you a little bit of motivation to try something on your own. Give you another idea, something else I could have done real easily. I could have taken this and I could have skipped the bottom piece, or I could have put the bottom piece below it like this, and then I could have done something like this to support it, and I could have done an inverted version. Maybe if I get a lot of feedback, maybe I'll actually try doing an inverted version next time. Anyway, like I said, I hope you learned something. I hope this motivated you to try something on your own. This is the Simpit. I'm Sean Cole, and I'll see you on the track.